Well, I'm glad you're all here to hear this story about Camp Meg. I take it everybody's heard at some point or other the story of Camp Meg. It goes back a long time. Well, in 2 years' time, it should be 200 years since she died, 1827. And so she travelled quite a lot through, she was on the run basically for a short time before she settled and up in the camp just above the Westhouses. So at that time she settled there. Before she died, she'd become a legend. She'd done so much within a short space of time when she arrived in the camp.
Here we are. So
I'll get this started. I started this research in the Camp Meg with a book by John Charles Carrick. He wrote it in 1907. Robert was the one that gave me the book. And this is the following preface introduces the story of Camp Meg and its earlier editions. The narrative of Camp Meg's life has been gathered together through the years from many different sources, persons, places, and every endeavour has been made to ensure accuracy and fullness. Francis Rigby's little book, published many years ago and now very scarce, is the basic of this story. I researched this Francis Rigby just to see who he was, and I found his father was John Rigby, and there he's here with John Romans from New Grange in the old days, a landowner, and he was always in conflict with the Marquis of Lothian and that. John Rigby he was a miner starter. Then he was employed by John Romans, and what he done was he became a tourist guide for the 1850s. So actually Newton Grange had tourist guides for the 1850s onwards, and it was either him that wrote the book in 1850, 1860, or his son Francis, one of these two. Francis was born 1832 and died 1896. Now there's the books. If you were going to actually research Camp Meg, the first I found was in, I mentioned Camp Meg was in the Scots Magazine in 1820. Old the New Edinburgh, volume 6, page 337 to 338. And they mentioned Curry. Camp Meg, when she was on the run, she sailed in Curry. It's like a mirror of Mayfield in Easthouses, the Roman camp. Just above Curry, there's a Roman camp there as well. I never knew that. She settled there, then she moved from Curry over to Mayfield. There's the second book, St. John Rigby was a coal miner, a local bar, the tourist guide, 1850s. His son wrote the book. What age ago? Not very sure. Probably got published in 1860. And there's a Scotsman newspaper in November 1600. The fourth one, New Zealand, all the way the other side of the world, New Zealand Press. They must be somebody similar across there, and they put the story in the newspaper in New Zealand, January 1901. And of course, the Reverend John Charles Carrick's book. The Reverend Carrick was born 1860 in Glasgow, and he died in 1914 in Newbattle Parish. His book, as I said, the Abbey of Mary's Newbattle, Memorial for Royal Visit, 1907, Camp Meg, pages 275 to 315, which is the most detailed one I can find. Now there's like a family tree, John Rigby. He was quite a man. He was a coal miner to start with, he was a forester, a ploughman, and finished up being a tourist guide working for John Romans. He wrote the book probably in 1860, as I said. The latest book I found that was on sale mentions Camp Meg. A lady, Lee Taylor, don't know if anybody's knows, she's from Warwick. It's only about 5 pages, there's not very much information in it. She actually says in that a page of 5 pages, I wonder what the people in Mayfield thought of Camp Meg. Well, it wasn't in Mayfield at that time. Mayfield was built in 1952. So she actually meant to the Westhouses. But it's worth looking at, I suppose. There's the mural used to hang in the community centre in Mayfield. You can remember it. The painting done that. All know is the painting that was HFW. They dated it 1995. So I don't know if you any actually remember that painting. So it hung 1995 to the close, I think 2017 when it closed. That's how Meg dressed. She had a man's coat, hat and vest, an army jacket, she had big black Wellington boots, everything masculine. She's got a slight beard and whiskers. So she's quite a sight to see when you meet her for the first time. Of course, Meg was very lucky.
1727. Janet Horn was the last person to be publicly executed as a witch in Scotland, accused by her neighbours of riding to the devil on her daughter's back and unable to repeat in Gaelic the Lord's Prayer at her trial. She was put to death in Donmar. Janet was stripped, smeared with tar, paraded through the town on a barrel and burned alive. 1736. Scotland's Witchcraft Act was finally repealed. The crime of witchcraft was henceforth abolished and replaced by a new crime of pretend witchcraft, carrying a maximum penalty of 1 year's imprisonment.
There's a map in about 1812, Easthouses, Westhouses, see Roman Camp, Waterstone House, that's where she came here, that's where she settled. And you had Blind Bonnie Farm, and at the bottom there see Hogg, that's where they used to burn the witches. So they're all close. Meg probably knew all about them. So the University of Edinburgh, they did a study of all the witches that were killed, murdered I suppose you would call it. And she walked there, the Easthouses. There was one woman accused of witchcraft, the Easthouses, two from the Westhouses. That's in there. William Watt, he was the first. He was the 21st of November 1628. There was Barbara Brownman, 7th October 1628. Isabel Ferguson, oh no, she came to Newbattle, I don't know where about Newbattle. 3rd August 1661. And of course there's Beatrix Leslie of Blackpool, which is quite close to here. She was 84-year-old, accused of causing the death of two girls. I believe that could be the first recording of two coal miners who died in pits, called Beatrix Leslie wrote the blame for it. You had she had an argument with them, and they died in a cave-in, and she got the blame of their death. So they found they strangled her when they burnt her alive. The famous saying at the time of the witch trials and the witch trials, "Thou shalt not allow a witch to live." That was from the Church of Scotland. Just accused of being a witch, you're condemned to death basically. You've done everything to find you guilty. Of course, you're locked up. The greatest punishment to start with didn't let you sleep. It kept you awake up 2 or 3 days, but no sleep for 3 days, you'll admit to anything, just so you can relax and get some sleep. Of course, if that was the working, start putting these contraptions on your face, and remember that bit with your tongue, so you couldn't talk, couldn't scold the person who's interrogating you, the witch's curse on you. So, of course, you couldn't eat, you drink, fluids, all the things you take. But the kingpin of them all, the witch picker, was John Kincaid. He came to Trinent in East Lothian. I think there was 10 witch pickers in the whole of Scotland, but he was the most evil of them all.
Torture and death. One of the most effective and most frequently used forms of torture used on accused witches was sleep deprivation. It leads to hallucinations, which is a very helpful tool for obtaining confessions. Only for a relatively small sample, 55 cases, are methods of torture mentioned, which included whipping them, binding them with ropes, hanging them by their thumbs, placing them in iron and stocks, putting them in castanolas, aka the warm hose, iron leg encasings that were heated until the legs began to roast. Pricking. The accused witch could also be pricked all over with a sharp instrument, known as pricking, in the search for insensitive spots where the devil had, visibly or invisibly, marked him. Alternatively, the witch mark might be pricked with a knife to see if it bled. If the mark did not bleed, the accused was guilty of being in league with the devil.
So he's pricking getting the accused in, getting the lady in, strip her, and he started going over and looking for moles, scars, things like that. And if he found a scar, say, he poke it with his knife. If it didn't bleed, you're in trouble. That's instruments, you use the one corner of it. That one there. Now, once you're found guilty, you put in a barrel, strip naked, put in a barrel, tar poured over you, you roll down the hill, and wherever the barrel landed, you set alight and you're burnt alive. Usually, quite a lot of the victims in the witch trials were in their 60s, 70s, kind of old.
An estimated 4,000 to 5,000 Scots, mostly from the lowlands, were tried for witchcraft between 1537 and 1727, with around 3/4 of those accused of sorcery and supernaturalism being women. From 1563 to 1727, the witch trials led to the execution of between 1,500 and 2,500 people, most of whom were strangled and burned. The first one tried for witchcraft was the Great Lady, Lady Janet Douglas of Glamis, condemned to death by King James V, convicted for witchcraft on the 17th of July 1537 and executed in Edinburgh.
There's some of the plaques various places through Scotland.
Meg was accused of having intimate dealings with Satan, and had she lived a few years earlier, she would have undoubtedly have made the acquaintance of the witchbreaker John Kincaid. One day she was seen gathering sticks in the camp, and at the self-same moment she was to be observed inside her house working her spinning wheel, the witch's gift of being in two places at once. Meg said herself she frequently heard the heavy footsteps behind her in the camp wood, and that she occasionally saw Satan there with a face as old-looking as the Penryn Hills opposite her house, and wearing a red cap trimmed with blue, but that she had always power to keep him off. One night she called at Darcy Farm and said she was going for tobacco, when she met the evil one, and had a long discussion with him. She described his costume, neat but not gaudy, long gaiters, elongated horns, and a red hat. On this occasion she seemingly omitted the blue trimming on his hat. After having had enough of his company, she turned to him and said, "Ye are the ugliest beast I ever saw in the camp, but I'm away from my baccy." At the beginning of 1800, the whole of Great Britain was in terror of the great Napoleon and his marching troop, who had advanced across Europe, conquering all who opposed him. Beacon houses and watchtowers were quickly raised, so that on any alarm being given of the approach of the French, signals could be flashed from one post to another along the miles of shore. One of these beacon houses was raised on Camp Wood, one of a chain along the entire east coast, in preparation for the French invader.
So the camp just at the top of Mayfield was known as the Roman camp, but it couldn't have been or used a Roman camp as a fort because there were the Romans didn't use these round kind of encampments. They always a square. The Romans used. They may have used it when they first conquered that took over that camp, but it was definitely not a Roman camp. Now, in my research, try to find out exactly where the camp house was. I found two maps that actually mention it. One map said the first sex there, the second one just quite close together, like, and the Roman camp just there.
Meg's story according to Meg. The tradition was that Camp Meg's real name was Margaret Hawthorne, and that she came from Galloway. And the story usually told of her is that she occupied there an excellent social position and married a man of high position and considerable fortune. He died early in life, leaving her a widow, with one little son, of considerable means and landed property. She had not been long widowed when a gentleman who lived near her in Galloway came and claimed part of the property as his, a claim which Margaret Hawthorne knew to be groundless, as her young husband had left her everything to herself and her child. The bully, however, tried to terrorise her, and at last, maddened with his insults and his injustice of her, her spirit broke, and seeing this evil man walking through her grounds, of which she was the owner, she walked up to him and demanded by what right he trespasses there. His reply was fresh insults. Thus, stung with passion, she drew a pistol, which for some time she had been carrying for fear of him, and shot him.
So that happened right in 1787. Margaret was down on the run from the law. She left her son with friends. She departed Galloway never to return. So she's on the run. She doesn't know where she's going. She went here, there, and everywhere, probably before she reached here. And of course, that newspaper report in Scotsman's magazine, she eventually arrived at Curry, the Roman camp just outside Curry. And of course, in that report it says she lived alone and the only companion was a cat. When she arrived there, I don't know, but she left about 1810.
Scots Magazine, 1820. Old and New Edinburgh, Volume 6, page 337 to 338. Curry Roman Camp. About the year 1820, there was found dead in one of the old camps near Curry a peculiar kind of recluse, who had a craze for haunting such places, and was known by the name of Camp Meg. She was a strange, half-witted creature, weird, wild-looking, and bronzed by exposure, but as she spoke with a good English accent, she was supposed to have been a soldier's widow. Her only companion was a cat. Westhouses Roman Camp. She was first found occupying a trench at the Roman camp in an angle that she had constructed for herself above Dalkeith. Dr. Dewar of Vogrie, taking taking pity upon her, had a ruin, old Watson Cottage, had the property repaired for her occupation. Years later a storm demolished it, on which she returned to her old den in the trenches. In 1815, after speaking to the factor, John Williamson, of the Lothing estate, she was given permission to occupy the camp house, which had been used as a lookout during the time of the Napoleonic Wars.
Well, she would teach, when she was up in the camp, she would spend all her time teaching the children the catechism and their Sunday schools. It was afternoon school she used to run. Because she was accused of being a witch. A lot of people thought she was a man related to a war. Reputation as a veterinary expert of considerable skill, a lot of farmers used her. She was accused of being a gypsy, a murderess, a soldier's widow. Meg was a curious sight, and no wonder people were afraid of her. She was quite manly in dress, with grey military coat, a man's hat and vest, black welting boots, everything masculine, and had a white horse called Screwball and a bulldog called Help. She was a shrewd, clever, active woman and worshipped the goddess Nicotine. She was a splendid horsewoman. Camp Men attended various markets, kept herself busy, issuing handbills to foreign farmers where she was able to be found for consultations. Tuesday Street Penny, Thursday Dalkey, Friday in Haggis. So that's an 1812 map of Midlothian. Camp Meg, you can see up there, Watson Cottage, when she first arrived. Dr. Dewar got done up for her because he felt sorry for her, had it all done up, which is right next to Bonnie Farm. So we're close by the two farms, two cottages. And, now that's a typical kind of watchtower that was built. Of course, it wasn't that as an actual watchtower, that's the top of the camp where you had the watchtower. It was either made of wood or it was a stone one. We don't know, there's nothing left of it now. Got a fantastic view for the camp. You see the fort, Fort E, the French ships that were going to invade Scotland. You see the French ships come along the fort, heading towards Edinburgh. So one, you go Westhouses, two at the Roman camp, three Watson House, four Bonnie, and five Hogg. Hogg being the place where you condemned to death for being a witch, you'd be taken there and burnt alive. Now, when I was looking for a map trying to place this camp, I come across a plan, Mark Sabodian a plan in Mayfield Farm. But done for the most noble, the 6th Marquis of Lothian by T. Granger, 1815. Right at the top, you see the X there, that's where it was marked Camp House. That was right that corner. So yeah, you'd have to go up there and examine to see if there's a... right, that's where the tower came up top there, there's one of these radio towers. I think that's where the radio tower, where Camp House was. So there's the 1817 map. You can mark the Westhouses with the Camp House in 1817. There's now a view for the old school, primary school, Langworth, no, there of course. Ex-Marks my house, well, of course you see the pit as well, the Victoria, good view. So there's the two maps I found, 1817 map and 1815 map. You see where the two maps are marked. Number 2, I can get the best view of the fort from number 2 map. Number 1 I think your view to the right would be walking the trees, so I don't know if it would be there. But I favour number 2 because it's a clear view, the whole Forth you get to there. That's where that tower is. I reckon might have been where the second number two where Meg could have had a look out to it. Or it's just round the corner from there, the other possible place was. You were up there looking, and just at that bit where Robert is, there's notice that there's a bulb there or something, there's a rubble stone, but it's dressed stone. And I found out, I was trying to find out, wonder where that, what house could it be. The top part, the southern part of Westhouses, you had the Cock Howlett, with a family called Darling lived. He was a guy who found Meg when she died. That's where he lived. And I reckon that could be the Cock Howlett cottage. That's what I suspect. There's a better aerial view. The farm, the Darlings lived, and not far from where Meg had a camp house. As I say, that number 2, my favourite, is the view, an unobstructed view, the Forth to number 2, where at number 1 you might get blocked with the trees. You see that mark was done in 1850, you see all the trees, the mark was planted.
Mr. James Rutherford, 1798 to 1887. Mr. James Rutherford in Easthouses was one of Camp Meg's pupils. She had to ask him for help because she had to endure the ill will of one of Lord Lothian's gamekeepers, who reported her to the Marquis for poaching. Mr. James Rutherford wrote a letter to the Marquis to Camp Meg's dictation, pleading her innocence and begging an audience. The Marquis granted her an audience and not only absolved her of all blame, but allowed her to remain at the camp unmolested. Mr. James Rutherford was largely taught by Meg and remembered her instructions to his dying day.
So I was begged, so we went out to meet the Marquis. I don't know what information Meg had, but not only did they believe her, they made sure that nobody would bother Meg again the rest of her life. So he made sure that he passed on to the next Marquis. So James Rutherford, I say he was born in 1788, died in 1887. He was married to Elizabeth Wilson, had 3 sons, George, Boyle and Robert. So basically what you've seen so far is what everybody should know about Meg. This is my possible explanation about Meg's life. I started in the Mine Museum June 1919, that's my father there on the left. He started there in 81 to 85 and unfortunately died. But while I was working in the Mine Museum, I got access to all the mining records. I kept on coming across this gentleman, John Williamson, was a mine engineer for the Marquis of Lothian, 1810 to 1833. He was born in 1875, died 1865. That's no specific. I had to borrow a 1850s Victorian gentleman to stand in his place. That guy's less standing. So John, he stayed at Westhouses, by the way. He was a Marquis's factor, what you call it, in charge of all his pets. That's where the Marquis made all his money, most of his money. He arrived in Newbattle, the same time as Meg as well, 1810. And he resided at Easthouses. He fell out with the Marquis of Lothian, the seventh Marquis of Lothian in 1833 after his disappearance. Something about a gas plant and all that. Different opinions. So John Williamson, He was born in either 1785 or 86. I found a John Williamson, born 5th of July 1785, his eldest father, John Williamson. His mother was Margaret Ferguson in the parish of Girk in Galloway. And Camp Meg always claimed she came to Galloway, she was born there. That lady that John Williamson married, her first name was Margaret. He is the first mentioned that this is John Williamson. In 1850, it was a big pit disaster. 17 miners were killed, and John Williamson was a top mining engineer. So they asked him to come along to check everything, see what caused the disaster. And the first thing he said to the reporters was, I have 40 years experience in the gold industry. So if that was 1850, he made that statement. He started the Marcos in 1810. So Newbattle, 1810, and he started working for the 5th Marcos of Oregon as his mining engineer. When he died in 1885, on his death certificate, mentioned that his father was named John Williamson and his mother was named Margaret. Didn't know her second name. Unknown. So there's the Common Pit disaster on the 20th of July 1850 in Airdrie. 17 miners were killed in a fire damp explosion. There's a newspaper report that states 40 years experience in the past. So that gives you the date 1810. He started as a mining engineer. There's a certificate I found, no PRs for the Galloway. John, lawful son of John Williamson and Margaret Ferguson, Lee Priest Farm, born the 5th and baptized the 12th of July 1785. So that's a Margaret for Galloway. The only one I can find. I checked all the births for that name. I was only one, and it disappeared after that birth. I don't know where they went. John Williamson, Margaret Ferguson, that's a map there of Galloway, where John Williamson was born in 1785. Of course, John got married to Francis Gordon from Preston Pans on the 22nd of June 1825. Of course, John Williamson was a kirk elder in Newbattle Church as well. I thought I got some information, census returns. So as I say, John Williamson was born in 1785, so I don't want to get the first census, was 1841, the second one 1851, and the last census 1861 before he died in 65. But unfortunately the 1841 census only asked you, were you born in this parish, yes or no? Obviously I knew that already. So he was living up last week, that time 1841. So he was born in last week, which I knew. 1851, it records he was born at sea. Strange one. 1861, he says he was born in Lanark. So I went to Lanark, I checked all Lanark out. There was 8 possible John Williamsons, but none of them were called, his mother was called Margaret. The father was William, Thomas, and all this. His mother was different names as well. So I've got no way of that information. See, there's the 1861 census. You see the top there about the X. Place of birth, Lancashire, Lanark. There's the death certificate. John Williamson, mining engineer, married to Francis Gordon. Now, his father was John Williamson, a lime burner, which he right beside the Westhouses where he lived, a lime quarry at one time. So that kind of fitted in. And his mother was named as Margaret Williamson, MS marital status unknown. So all you know, his mother was, the first name was Margaret. Margaret's appearance at the Roman Camp in 1810 and her manner of life were mystery to everyone. It is said that she told her story to one person only, because she must have told everybody else. that she came from Galway, her family name was Falkland, that she was a widow, but Meg never divulged her husband's name. Now there's the death of John Williamson, mining engineer, the 4th of November 1885, aged 79. That's in the Edinburgh Morningside Cemetery. And of course his wife, she died in 1887, age 81, Francis Gordon, Western. What was the connection between the model? Margaret must have knew something, connection with this 5th Marquess of Lothian. Why she's so friendly with Margaret? Meg arrived at Newbattle about 1810, thereabout, and settled into the Watchstone Cottage. John Williamson started working for the 5th Marquess of Lothian and settled into Westhouses. Quite a skilled guy, this John Williamson. He was a map maker. He loved the maps. He made that one for the Marquess of Lothian. Oh, his mining interest, that's just two. But the Mining Museum, Newton Grange, they have a copy of this. It's a rather large map, quite detailed. It's the names of all the pits. Marquess of Lothian. He was also a skilled engineer. He designed it when he got the bridge now, when it's so into it. This was the first one. This was built in 1830, this lasted until the big one was opened up. So you got John Williamson, bridge designer in 1830, it was opened on the 21st of January 1832. Not a very long time, but that was the big one. Because a lot of coal was coming from that part of the Lothians to Edinburgh. The reason for building that bridge was to get the coal into Edinburgh, because Edinburgh was demand for the coal. You see the Sun Hotel there, that's all paper and all there. I found this in the archives of the Mine Museum. It's a letter, John Williamson, who was the designer for the bridge. That kind of confirms that as well, dated 1832. Because he worked when he spits, he was in charge, he was the branch colliery. John Williamson affixed it above the entrance to the road level is the following inscription. Got this fitted, it was branch level, Marquess of Lothian, John Williamson, engineer, 1828. Probably the plaque still down in a bit to this day. I remember going to use myself as a bairn, because that still stood there. Until somebody got trapped apparently down the council. Says, right, we're going to knock that down. That would be in the 1860s before the knock that down. Now here's another one, Newbattle Cove. I don't know how many knows what the Cove did, Newbattle or Newbattle Abbey. The other side of the Abbey, there's a tunnel that goes into the, under the ground. You see it was built by the monks. Map, you can actually see roughly the Abbey, plus the other side of the water. It's just quite close to town. The Mining Museum got a phone call one day, 1995. See that the man was out walking his dog disappeared in this hole in the ground, and they examined it, They think it had something to do with mining with the monks. So what they done was they sent Richard Thompson down to investigate. One of the guides had been here. Richard found that there was no danger in it, but because he didn't find any gas, didn't mean there wasn't any gas. He said it did look very safe, and the council came along and they built that metal mesh gate over the entrance so nobody could enter. But if you did get into it, this is what I'm showing you this for. On the right of the door, there, it's got J.W., John Williamson. That's the kind of thing John Williamson, whose name on it, I think it. Because that's what they call the prayer cell for the monks. The monks must have used it when they, for quietness or whatever, or they called it the prayer cell. There's a close up the JW. What a graffiti with the Robert, investigated the that's the graffiti. So you got D. Nisbet, 1980, J.B. King, 1893, somebody called Wermouth, dated 1860, took their job of Newbattle. Goes on, of course the further you go in the water gets deeper, the muck, it's up here, just past your ankles, it's like quicksand, and it saps all the energy, and that's where you get to the dead end. It's a dead end at the far end of it. Of course the water's, by that time the water's quite deep, it's up here just at your knees. So I wouldn't advise you going there if it was raining, because it would soon flood. So we've got John Lewis, a mine engineer. He worked for 3 marquises in the Lothian. The 5th marquis, the 1775, 1815, the 6th marquis of the Lothian, 1815 to 1824, and the 7th marquis of the Lothian, 1824 to 1841. This is the one John Williamson fell out with. It's something to do with a gas project. John Williamson didn't like what the market was proposing, so they agreed to go separate ways. So there's the Roman camp, White and Curry, quite close, just like Mayfield one, right? Which got the, well, I should say Westhouses, the Roman camp, Westhouses. You see, Meg had something to do with the Romans. She said she could speak to the ghosts of the Romans. So that's why she decided to live by Curry, Roman camp Curry, then moved across to Westhouses Roman camp. And there's where I showed you the map, where it shows Camp House in 1817. And Mortstone Cottage just above there. Dr. Dewar felt sorry for her. The new bought Kirkyard is where Margaret ended up. The final resting place, 1827. See, it is recorded that Camp Meg was buried in the centre of the graveyard next to Margaret Patterson, that gravestone there. Right in the centre of the graveyard, the miners. Now, it's all a miner's stone there. And I wonder, well, I remember looking at that and saying, what's the connection with miners? Why is that miner's stone both sides? That's one side of it. And Margaret Patterson was married to Robert Allen. That's the other side of it. But she died, William Douglas died first. Her children died. She's still reasonably young. She married again. It's Robert Allen, her children again, and they all died. She had a hard life, that lassie, Margaret Patterson. But I drew the bit clearer, because there's a couple of things missing off the stone. There to replace them all. Right at the top there, remember you must die. There were the parish records for the first husband and their children. They all died with typhoid or something, or consumption, which is a wasting disease at all. That's around the same time. Jean and Robert, they all died as well. Here lies Robert Allen, son of John Allen, Foley and Langlow, died November 29th, 1752, East Street. Here also Jean Allen, daughter to John Allen, aged 7 years, died 1755. Was the father, he died 55, that same year. And of course, Margaret died 2 years later after that. She had a hard life. She worked in the pits, potter, going the coal wagons with the face line to the pit bowl. Who was Margaret Patterson? Because you think about, remember the miners were slaves. They weren't allowed to attend church. They weren't allowed to get buried in consecrated ground. They were isolated. Then all of a sudden they were allowed to the church. Margaret Patterson. Why is her gravestone the only miner's gravestone in Newbattle Parish Cemetery? What's so special there? She must be somebody highly respected within the community. You have the only one to get a gravestone and have a name. Hoping planning to look into her further because it would be interesting to know why she's got such a special woman. And of course, Camp Meg got buried next to her. According to the Kirk Session account, this is off the Kirk Session accounts, it mentions about Meg. She got money, she was rated 25, she was going poorly, her health was declining, and she was getting money to the church for food, and you try to help her get through the day. She was found dead lying in the snow on her own doorstep. After the snow during a severe winter, the 1st of March 1827. Been lying there for several days, nobody knows how long. Meg was found dead by William Darling of Cock or William Bailey. I've a couple of books mentioning both names who found her. I favour William Darling. She died between 1st of March and 30th of May. First time she could have died, and when in the Kirk Session minutes, when she was getting money to pay for her funeral on the 30th of May. She was buried in the middle of Old Newbattle Cemetery on the 11th of May 1827. The body was conveyed to the camp to Newbattle Churchyard by William Darling, John Bailey, James Bailey, and James Lynn. I reckon it was John Rigby wrote this.
Caledonia's huntsmen now safely may escape, since their heroine's gone. The pride of the camp, her bones are at rest, but their souls on the trap, in the valley of death, through yonder dreary swamp. Safe thither may she be led by a lamp, the lamp of glory. If Meg's life was that of a witch, her death was doubly so. There is an old superstition that when a fearful hurricane blows, it marks the passing on that night of a witch's spirit into the unseen. In the spring of 1827, Meg took ill, though she never took to her bed. The night before her death, a terrific and most memorable snowstorm came on, and so tremendous were the snows that the hills and the valleys were blocked, and in many parts of the snow was 20 feet deep.
So eventually I run out of wood for a camp, for a fire, for warm. She had nobody to help her, so eventually the cold would have killed her. But we don't know how long when actual William Darling found it, actual date. So that's why you got 1st of March until May. Perhaps the Mayfield Easthouses Community should consider a memorial to Camp Meg. What do you think? Meg died in March 1827. It'll be 200 years in March, 2 years' time.